Welcome to Washington Today on C-SPAN Radio for Tuesday, July 11, 2023. President Joe Biden attends the NATO Leaders Summit in Lithuania, talking about Sweden likely to become the newest member of the military alliance now that Turkey has lifted its objection. And about language being crafted on conditions for when Ukraine could be invited to become a member, language that the Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky is not happy with. Well, the latest just ahead. President Biden's nominee to be the next chair of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, General Charles C.Q. Brown, Jr., testifies before the Senate Armed Services Committee. He's asked about Senator Tommy Tuberville's hold on confirming top military nominations until a Pentagon policy on abortion is reversed, and also about his policy on diversity, equity, and inclusion, or DEI, in the military. We'll get reaction to Senator Tuberville's statement questioning whether white nationalism equals racism. A Senate hearing on the proposed merger of the PGA Tour and Live Golf, which is funded by Saudi Arabia. We'll talk about that with Washington Post sports writer Rick Mace. And the chair of the House Energy and Commerce Committee, Republican Kathy McMorris Rogers, says that Dr. Anthony Fauci and other National Institutes of Health officials were not properly reappointed in 2022, and that means their actions after that were invalid. Military band playing at the arrival ceremony for President Joe Biden at the presidential palace in Vilnius, Lithuania. CNN reports that President Biden and alliance leaders enter the first day of the high-stakes NATO summit Tuesday with a reinvigorated sense of unity after a major win on Monday evening when Turkey agreed to Sweden's bid to join the alliance. But the thorny issue of Ukraine's membership remains. The leaders gather here for a two-day summit that could become one of the most consequential gatherings of the alliance in modern history, coming about a month into Ukraine's slow counteroffensive and weeks after a failed mutiny in Russia became a major threat to President Vladimir Putin's leadership. That reporting from CNN. Among the one-on-one meetings that President Biden held today was with the NATO Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg.
President Biden, dear Joe, welcome to the NATO summit, and many, many thanks for your strong leadership making this alliance united and even stronger. This summit is already historic because the agreement we made yesterday will make Sweden a full member of NATO. And that will make our alliance even more capable of defending all allies. At this meeting, we will also send a clear message to Ukraine that we stand by them as long as needed, and also that we agree on united and positive message on the path forward for Ukraine and membership for Ukraine. Another major message from this summit will be that we need to invest more in our defense. And we will agree a new defense investment pledge, where we state clearly that 2% of GDP for defense is a minimum. The good news is that European allies and Canada are stepping up. This year we have new numbers showing that they have added 8.3% in real terms for their defense budgets. This is record high. And that demonstrates that allies are delivering on their commitments. So once again, Mr. President, it's great to have you here at the NATO Summit.
It's good to be here, and thank you for continuing to deliver. As I've made no mistake, the press is not at all surprised. I've been touting the fact that I think it's really important at this critical moment in Ukraine, in the whole NATO issue, that you continue to lead NATO. You're trusted. No one knows the situation that we're facing better than you do. And this is a historic moment. The adding of Finland and Sweden to NATO is consequential. And your leadership really matters. And we agree on the language that we proposed, that you proposed, relative to the future of Ukraine being able to join NATO. And we're looking for a continued united NATO. They've heard me say, my American president heard me say many times, I still think that President Putin thinks the way he succeeds is to break NATO. Not going to do that, especially with you as the leader. So thank you for willing to do it.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
President Joe Biden and NATO Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg meeting at the NATO summit in Lithuania. President Biden also met with the U.S. Senate delegation attending the summit, Democrats Jeanne Shaheen and Dick Durbin, Independent Angus King, and Republicans Tom Tillis, Pete Ricketts, and Dan Sullivan. About Ukraine's possible admission to NATO, White House National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan told reporters that NATO will lay out a path of reform for Ukraine so that, when the war ends, that country can move towards NATO membership. Jake Sullivan was asked by a reporter how long that might take.
This reform path that you're laying out for Ukraine, how long do you anticipate it will take Ukraine to make those reforms once the war has ended?
I can't put a timetable on it. I don't believe that you will see that coming out of here. This is about the substance of democratic and security sector reforms and getting those right. And of course, that in many ways turns on the particular steps that are taken. From our perspective, it is the work of the alliance with Ukraine to lay out that reform path and then to have Ukraine work towards it. They have something called an annual national program. It details many of the steps that they have embraced and are taking. And in fact, in the course of the summit over the next 2 days, the alliance will mark a lot of the progress Ukraine has already made and then have the opportunity to discuss with Ukraine the further steps.
But I tell you, is this a 5-year path? Is this a 10-year path? How soon would you like to see Ukraine become a member of NATO?
I can't put a timetable on it for you.
The White House National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan at a news conference at the NATO summit in Lithuania. He also confirmed that President Biden will be meeting Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky at that summit on Wednesday. President Zelensky, while traveling to the summit, put out a statement today about Ukraine joining NATO. It reads in part, "It's unprecedented and absurd when the time frame is not set, neither for the invitation nor for Ukraine's membership, while at the same time vague wording about conditions is added even for inviting Ukraine. It seems there's no readiness neither to invite Ukraine to NATO nor to make it a member of the alliance. This means that a window of opportunity is being left to bargain Ukraine's membership in NATO in negotiations with Russia. And for Russia, that means motivation to continue its terror. Uncertainty is weakness, and I will openly discuss this at the summit." That was part of the statement from Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky as he was traveling to the summit. NATO Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg addressed this at his own news conference.
Andrew Gray from Reuters, Secretary General, to come back to President Zelensky's remarks. He said it would be absurd if a time frame is not set neither for invitation nor for Ukraine's membership. How would you respond to that specific point, and why have allies not set out a time frame today?
What we have agreed is a very substantive package with many different elements that helps to move Ukraine closer to NATO, help them to move towards NATO membership. And this is partly very practical support on, for instance, interoperability. And reforms, defense sector reforms and interoperability are among the conditions which are important for membership. So that's a practical way of moving Ukraine closer to NATO. Then we also send a strong political message with the language on membership, including the language which is now in the communique on invitation. So there's never been a stronger message from NATO at any time, both when it comes to the political message on the path forward for membership and the concrete support from NATO allies, military support, but also the practical support on how to ensure full interoperability. And if you look at other membership processes, there have not been time lines for those processes. They are conditions-based, has always been.
NATO Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg at the NATO summit in Lithuania at a news conference. Story from AFP. U.S. President Joe Biden thanked his Turkish counterpart, Recep Tayyip Erdogan, on Tuesday for his courage in dropping opposition to Sweden's entry to NATO. President Biden spoke with President Erdogan from Air Force One for nearly an hour on Sunday in a bid to break the impasse and avoid an embarrassing failure at the Vilnius summit. President Erdogan abruptly dropped his opposition late Monday on the eve of the NATO get-together. For months, President Erdogan insisted on a crackdown in Sweden against members of Kurdish movements outlawed in Turkey, something the Swedish government says it has now done. But speculation mounted over what other concessions Turkey extracted to give its green light. President Erdogan had demanded at the last minute that approval for Sweden in NATO would depend on Turkey being able to renew stalled membership talks with the European Union. Another long-standing demand from Turkey for the purchase of modern U.S. F-16 fighter jets seemed to get a boost in the wake of the decision on Sweden. That was from AFP. Here are the two presidents, President Biden and President Erdogan, meeting at the NATO summit.
Mr. President, it's good to see you again. Delight to be with you. And, we're in this historic summit meeting. We're resolving a lot of things, I hope. And we made all the more historic by the agreement you reached yesterday and the addition of Sweden and how you're going to proceed. I want to thank you for your diplomacy and your courage to take that on. And I want to thank you for your leadership, Mr. President. This summit is reaffirming our commitment to NATO defense. We're close allies in NATO, and I hope we can make it even stronger. So welcome.
Mr. President, my dear friend, I would like to first of all thank you for congratulating me in the aftermath of my re-election to my current post. And I'm grateful for the congratulatory messages that you have extended to me. And within the framework of our strategic mechanism, I think it's high time for the heads of states to get together for further consultations. That's why I believe today's meeting with you within the margin of the NATO summit is the first step forward. Our meetings prior to this were mere warm-ups, but now we are initiating a new process. This new process is a process of 5 years, and now you are getting prepared for the forthcoming elections. And with the forthcoming elections, I would like to take this opportunity to also wish you the best of luck.
Thank you. I look forward to meeting with you the next 5 years. Okay.
President Joe Biden and the Turkish President Erdogan at the NATO summit. From a Reuters article, Washington will move ahead with the transfer of F-16 fighter jets to Turkey in consultation with Congress. U.S. National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan said on Tuesday, a day after Ankara gave the green light for Sweden to join NATO. Turkey, which had been the main stumbling block on Sweden's path toward the alliance, had requested in October 2021 to buy $20 billion of Lockheed Martin Corporation F-16 fighters and nearly 80 modernization kits for its existing warplanes. That article from Reuters. Jake Sullivan at the NATO summit at a news conference asked if the two are linked.
Turkey's request for F-16s and whether or not that factored into any of the conversations that went on in the lead up to
President Biden has been clear and unequivocal for months that he supported the transfer of F-16s to Turkey, that this is in our national interest. It's in the interest of NATO that Turkey get that capability. He has placed no caveats or conditions on that in his public and private comments over the past few months, and he intends to move forward with that transfer in consultation with Congress.
U.S. National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan with reporters. The U.S. Senate Foreign Relations Committee Chair Bob Menendez, Democrat from New Jersey, has opposed selling F-16 fighter jets to Saudi Arabia and has placed a hold on Senate approval for some time. On Monday, Reuters reports, he said there was a lull in Turkey's aggression against its neighbors, and he is in talks with the Biden administration about letting the sale go forward. This is Washington Today. President Biden's nominee to chair the Joint Chiefs of Staff, General Charles C.Q. Brown Jr., testified today before the Senate Armed Services Committee, getting questions about Ukraine, China, military recruitment, readiness, and weapons procurement. Senator Tommy Tuberville, Republican from Alabama, has a hold on promotion of more than 250 senior military officers over his objection to a Defense Department policy that pays travel expenses for personnel seeking an abortion if they're stationed in states that ban or restrict access to abortion. And at the hearing, Senator Elizabeth Warren, Democrat from Massachusetts, asked about that.
I want to close and use our remaining time by asking about the impact of the holds on the promotions and assignments of senior military officers that the senator from Alabama has imposed. The families of these service members are held at a standstill. They're unsure about where to enroll their kids in school or whether they need to arrange a move across country or even somewhere else around the world. General Brown, can you just spend a minute here and talk to us about the impact that these holds are having on our military families?
There's several factors that I think about as we're going through this and how we are working to mitigate the challenges associated with the holds. There's aspects of readiness and the transition in leadership, and for our young service members to know who is in the position of leadership that it's qualified, has the experience to be there, and not, in some cases, putting we have strong deputies, but at the same time, they don't have the same level of experience going forward. In addition to the senior officers, there's a whole chain of events that go down to our more junior officers, and that has an impact. It has an impact on their progression in their career field potentially, because if one doesn't get promoted or move on, then they're blocking a spot for someone else. At the same time, we have several members who have served honorably and are ready to retire, but they're going to, in some cases, stay with us to help us mitigate through that challenge. The area that hits us, I think, that we do need to think about is how it impacts our families, because it has an impact not just for the senior officer, but all their staff and all those below them. It has an impact, and as you highlighted, it's whether it's school, whether it's employment, or the fact that they've already sold their home because they thought they were going to move and now are living in temporary quarters. That creates a challenge. The last thing I'd highlight on that is my concern there is future retention, because we have our more junior officers who now look up and say, if that's the challenge that I'm going to have to deal with in the future, I'm going to balance between my family and serving in a senior position, and we will lose talent because of those challenges. And the spouse network is alive and well, and the spouses will compare notes. And the member may want to serve, but the spouses and the families get a huge vote and why we continue to be able to serve. And I thank my family for that opportunity to allow me to continue to serve.
I see Mrs. Brown nodding her head on this as well. If the senator from Alabama continues his reckless action, he will soon be holding 650 leaders who have served their country honorable hostage. And as you rightly point out, that has effects on many more of the best and brightest who have volunteered to serve our nation.
Senator Elizabeth Warren, Democrat from Massachusetts, questioning General Charles C.Q. Brown, Jr., nominated for chair of the Joint Chiefs of Staff at today's Armed Services Committee hearing. The general's nomination may be one that is held up by Senator Tuberville's objections. The term of the current chair of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, General Mark Milley, expires at the end of September. Ahead of today's hearing, a group called American Accountability Foundation filed a complaint against General Brown with the Air Force Inspector General's office that, according to a news release, says, quote, General Brown has made statements in favor of making hiring and promotion decisions in the Air Force based on race, as well as monitoring the private beliefs of recruits, airmen, officers, and employees with the intention of censoring those beliefs. Today, Senator Ted Budd, Republican from North Carolina, questioned the nominee about these issues.
Military recruiting shortfalls continue to be a grave concern as we consider how the recruiting crisis impacts our nation's military readiness. In our discussions in my office, we talked about diversity, equity, and inclusion policies that, in my view, deter rather than encourage young people to serve. I've heard from many young and qualified individuals from North Carolina who are hesitant to join a force they see as extremely political and defined by DEI policies. In August 22, you signed a memorandum along with the Secretary and Undersecretary of the Air Force directing Air Education and Training Command and the Air Force Academy to achieve diversity and inclusion goals broken down by percentages of both race and sex. We talked about this. It was a good discussion. But I want to give you an opportunity to respond in an open session. What's the purpose of this memo, the one from August of 2022, and how do such policies improve recruiting? Bottom line, I think that we should be suspect of any policies that give advantage to some groups at the expense of others. But I'll give you opportunity.
Senator, the goal is to tap into all the talent across our nation. And that memo outlined applicant goals, and the goal there was to actually outreach to broader aspects across the nation and show them the opportunities to join the force. What the memo also says is there's a goal to allow those young people to understand what the opportunities are, but to get selected and to come into the academy, ROTC, or any other program, it's merit-based. And they have to be qualified and meet the standard to join. We've got to make sure we provide the opportunity. We've talked about, I've talked personally about recruiting the aspect. Young people only aspire to be what they know about. And if they don't know anything about the military, and we don't outreach to them, we may miss some tremendous talent. But they've got to be qualified because we're a merit-based organization, and that's the way we've operated for an extended period of time, and that's the way we will continue to operate as a military force.
General Charles C.Q. Brown, Jr., nominated to be chair of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, questioned by Senator Ted Budd, Republican from North Carolina, at today's Armed Services Committee hearing. An article about the hearing at Stars and Stripes includes this. General Brown highlighted his lack of extensive experience in Washington, D.C. as an asset that would offer a fresh perspective. A career fighter pilot, General Brown logged more than 3,000 flight hours, including 130 hours in combat, and has led the Air Force since 2020. You can find the full video of today's hearing at our website, cspan.org. The Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer, Democrat from New York, is taking issue with what Senator Tommy Tuberville, Republican from Alabama, said on CNN Monday night about the definition of white nationalism, that he said white nationalism equated to racism is a matter of opinion. Senator Schumer said that Senator Tuberville is fanning the flames of bigotry and intolerance. This is what Senator Tuberville said in an interview with CNN's Caitlin Collins.
My opinion of a white nationalist, if somebody wants to call him white nationalist, to me is an American. It's an American. Now, if that white nationalist is a racist, I'm totally against anything that they want to do because I am 110% against racism. But I want somebody that's in our military, that's strong, that believes in this country, that's an American, that will fight along anybody, whether it's a man or woman, black or white, red, it doesn't make any difference. And so I'm totally against identity politics. I think it's ruining this country, and I think that Democrats ought to be ashamed for how they're doing this because it's dividing this country and it's making this country weaker every day.
But that's not identity politics. You said a white nationalist is an American.
It is identity politics.
You said a white nationalist is an American, but a white nationalist is someone who believes horrific things. Do you really think that's someone who should be serving in the military?
Well, that's just a name that has been given. I mean,
it's not.
Listen,
it's a real definition. There's real concerns
about extremism. So if you're going to do away with most white people in this country out of the military, we got huge problems. We got huge problems.
It's not people who are white. It's white nationalists
that have a few probably different beliefs.
Right?
That have different beliefs. Now, if racism is one of those beliefs, I'm totally against it. I am totally against racism.
Senator Tommy Tuberville on CNN Monday night with Caitlin Collins. Senator Chuck Schumer reacting today on the Senate floor.
Last night, given another chance to clear the air, he suggested that no, white nationalists aren't inherently racist, that yes, white nationalism is American, and that the definition of white nationalism is a matter of opinion. It's hard to believe that the senator from Alabama has to be corrected again. The senator from Alabama is wrong, wrong, wrong. The definition of white nationalism is not a matter of opinion. White nationalism, the ideology that one race is inherently superior to others, that people of color should be segregated, subjected, and relegated to second-class citizenship, is racist down to its rotten core. And for the senator from Alabama to obscure the racist nature of white nationalism is indeed very, very dangerous. His words have power and carry weight with the fringe of his constituency, just the fringe. But if that fringe listens to him, excuse and defend white nationalism, he is fanning the flames of bigotry and intolerance.
Senator Chuck Schumer, Democrat from New York, the majority leader today on the Senate floor. The Senate Republican leader, Minority Leader Mitch McConnell of Kentucky, was asked about this at his news conference.
Do you have any concerns that you have a member of your conference, Senator Tuberville, who seems to have a hard time denouncing white nationalism, especially as it pertains to white nationalism in the military?
Yeah, white supremacy is simply unacceptable in the military and in our whole country.
The Senate Republican leader Mitch McConnell at a news conference. Another story from CNN late this afternoon. Republican Senator Tommy Tuberville of Alabama finally condemned white nationalists, telling reporters on Capitol Hill on Tuesday that white nationalists are racist, after previously refusing to equate white nationalism with racism. Washington Today continues in a moment.
Live Wednesday on C-SPAN Radio. At 10 a.m. Eastern, FBI Director Christopher Wray testifies before the House Judiciary Committee. Listen on the free C-SPAN Now app or ask your smart speaker to play C-SPAN Radio.
When citizens are truly informed, our republic thrives. Get informed straight from the source. On C-SPAN. Unfiltered, unbiased, word for word. From the nation's capital to wherever you are. Because the opinion that matters the most is your own. This is what democracy looks like. C-SPAN, powered by cable.
Welcome back to Washington Today, available as a podcast wherever you find your podcasts and on the C-SPAN Now mobile app. A few more headlines. Staff of Supreme Court Justice Sonia Sotomayor has, writes Associated Press, often prodded public institutions that have hosted the justice to buy her memoir on children's books, works that have earned her at least $3.7 million since she joined the court in 2009. AP says it got the information through more than 100 open records requests at public institutions. And the White House announcing the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, or NOAA, will establish 2 virtual research centers to help manage and improve resilience to extreme heat experienced across the United States this summer. The $5 million will come from the Inflation Reduction Act the president signed into law last year. This story from The Hill. Senators grilled 2 members of PGA Tour leadership in a Tuesday hearing on the organizers' pending deal to form a new for-profit golf entity with Live Golf, the league backed by Saudi Arabia's private investment fund. PGA Tour Chief Operating Officer Ron Price and board member Jimmy Dunn, who helped broker the truce between the 2 entities, appeared before the Senate Homeland Security and Governmental Affairs Permanent Subcommittee on Investigations amid continued questions over the deal. The merger has not yet been finalized beyond a framework released last month. That reporting from The Hill. C-SPAN covered this hearing. Here is the chair of the subcommittee, Senator Richard Blumenthal, Democrat from Connecticut.
Today's hearing is about much more than the game of golf. It's about how a brutal, repressive regime can buy influence, indeed even take over a cherished American institution to cleanse its public image. It's a regime that has reportedly killed journalists, jailed and tortured dissidents, fostered the war in Yemen, and supported other terrorist activities, including the 9/11 attack on our nation. Today is about sports washing. It's also about hypocrisy, how vast sums of money can induce individuals and institutions to betray their own values and supporters, or perhaps reveal a lack of values from the beginning. It's about other sports and institutions that could fall prey if their leaders let it be all about the money. Perhaps to state the obvious, sports are central to our culture and society. They have huge implications for our way of life, our local economies and communities, close to home and our image abroad. Athletes like the PGA Tour golf players are role models. They are ambassadors of our values, and the institutions that concern us today are vital to our national interests. To have them taken over by a repressive foreign regime certainly is a matter of our national security.
Senator Richard Blumenthal, Democrat from Connecticut, chair of the Homeland Security and Governmental Affairs Permanent Subcommittee on Investigations, opening up today's hearing. The ranking Republican on the subcommittee is Ron Johnson of Wisconsin.
Now, I have the deepest sympathy for the families of 9/11 and support their efforts of obtaining information currently being withheld by the U.S. and Saudi governments. Mr. Chairman, as a quick aside, I was approached by some members of 9/11 families of the hall today, and they gave me a document that summarizes, I guess, the FBI's investigation of Saudi involvement in 9/11. And unlike so many, or like so many documents that I received, it's heavily redacted. The FBI, the United States government, the Saudi government is not being transparent with the 9/11 families. And I want to completely support the 9/11 families in obtaining transparency and the truth. So I'd like to enter this document into the record so that people can view for themselves the lack of transparency of our government and the Saudi government.
Without objection, and I might just say I have spoken to the 9/11 families about exactly this resistance by our own government, the FBI and other agencies, to provide the facts that are necessary for them to seek simple justice, and I would join you in a bipartisan effort to make those facts more available.
And hopefully that's a really good bipartisan result of this hearing. Sports washing is also a legitimate issue, but no amount of money can wash away the stain of the brutal Khashoggi assassination and other human rights abuses. But it would be grossly unfair to expect the PGA Tour to bear the full burden of holding Saudi Arabia accountable. After all, anyone who drives a car or uses oil-based products has helped fill the coffers of the Saudi Public Investment Fund. Foreign investment in the U.S. is generally a good thing, and I'd rather have the Saudis reinvest their oil wealth in America as opposed to China or Russia. Also, if the kingdom's involvement in golf and other sports helps it to modernize and offer more rights to women, wouldn't that be a good thing?
Senator Ron Johnson of Wisconsin, ranking Republican on the subcommittee that held today's hearing. One of the witnesses, the PGA Tour Chief Operating Officer Ron Price, in his opening statement explained that the PGA Tour had no choice but to partner with LIV Golf due to the cost of an antitrust lawsuit that LIV Golf filed against the PGA Tour.
It was very clear to us and to all who love the PGA Tour and the game of golf as a whole that the dispute was undermining growth of our sport and was threatening the very survival of the PGA Tour, and it was unsustainable. While we had significant wins in litigation, our players, our fans, our partners, our employees, our charities, and the communities we support would lose in the long run. Instead of losing control of the PGA Tour, we pursued a peace that would not only end the divisive litigation battles, but would also maintain the PGA Tour's structure, mission, and longstanding support for charity. While negotiations toward a definitive agreement are currently underway, the framework agreement contains important safeguards that ensures the tour will operate fundamentally as it does today. The tour will control its operations. The tour will control the board of the new PGA Tour subsidiary, and the tour will be the governing body for competitive golf in connection with any combined golf operations. The agreement provides clear, explicit, and permanent safeguards that ensure the tour will lead the decisions that shape our future and that we will have control over our operations, strategy, and continuity of our mission.
Ron Price, PGA Tour Chief Operating Officer. With more on today's Senate subcommittee hearing on the PGA Tour and LIV Golf proposed merger. On the phone is Rick Mays, Washington Post sports writer. Thanks for being with us. You were in the room for the hearing. What did you take away from it?
Yeah, I thought it was really interesting. The hearing was almost 3 hours long. I think we expected to hear the tour kind of give a passionate defense of the deal. I think what I didn't quite anticipate was just the tenuous nature of the deal and the way they kind of described it in multiple ways. They made clear this was just the deal before the deal, and they made it clear there's a lot of work to be done before there's a final agreement. There's a lot of wrinkles that need to be ironed out, and they not necessarily cast some doubt on whether or not they'd actually reach that point, but they definitely made clear that there's a lot of work to be done before they reach an actual final agreement that might be worth the scrutiny that was being cast on this preliminary deal today.
People hearing about this hearing may be asking, why is this an issue for Congress to get involved in? Was that addressed today?
was. I think especially from some of the Republican members of the subcommittee, they were definitely curious about why this is a congressional matter. And, that's not an unpopular thing when committees tackle some of these niche topics. But we saw Rand Paul come in. I don't believe he's a member of the subcommittee, but he wanted to come in and say, I'm not sure Congress should be meddling here. Ron Johnson, the senator from Wisconsin, the ranking member of the subcommittee. And he was very measured, but in the end, he was very clear that he thought it was probably premature for the subcommittee to be probing this deal. Some people cited other topics that should take precedence. But Senator Blumenthal, the chair of the subcommittee, said over and over again that he thought this was, more than a private business matter, and it was something that had a huge degree of public interest, and that's part of the subcommittee's charges. They can investigate matters like this, and Senator Blumenthal said this is not the last hearing on the topic. He wants to continue going forward. There's a lot of questions that were clearly not answered today that he thinks are still worth asking.
Also in the audience, people wearing hats referencing the 9/11 attacks. How many were there, and how did that issue come up today?
Yeah, there was a handful in the room, and we knew they'd be there. We've seen many of these families at different Live Golf events, both this year and their inaugural season last year. And I wouldn't say it was an elephant in the room. It was addressed very directly by multiple senators, by the witnesses. Jimmy Dunn, the policy board member from the PGA Tour, was very passionate on the topic and explained how many of his colleagues, he lost in the attacks. I'm not sure there was a simple way to address it, except to say that everyone has a lot of sympathy for them. But from the PGA Tour's perspective, they had other reasons to get this deal done. And they don't feel like they're turning a blind eye to it. They expressed their sympathy, but they also, had business reasons to strike this deal with the Saudis.
We're talking with Rick Mays from the Washington Post. In addition to the witnesses, you write about some documents released today giving some insight into this proposed merger.
Yeah, I think that was probably one of the most newsworthy things to come out of the hearing today. Was they entered into record some 275 pages of emails, communications, messages that they'd received from the PGA Tour and from Live Golf. And it was really the clearest picture we had to date of some of the back and forth that led to the agreement. It told us when they met, where they met. We saw different iterations of the basic framework agreement that both sides agreed to. And so we were able to see some of the changes and some of the proposals that went back and forth. And frankly, some of the proposals were a little eye-opening. It's not clear if any of these are going to continue forward, if we're going to see any of these in the final agreement, if and when that gets struck. But they talked about Tiger Woods and Rory McIlroy joining Live Golf, possibly owning teams and appearing in those events. They talked about having a team championship that we played in Saudi Arabia. They talked about Saudi PIF or maybe Aramco, the oil company, sponsoring or having some branding at PGA events. And there was a lot of talk about what should happen to Greg Norman, the kind of controversial, polarizing head of Live Golf. PGA Tour clearly does not see a place for him in the future. Saudi PIF is pushed back on that a little bit. But those were some of the things that we had questions about. We weren't sure how they were discussed or to what level of detail they were discussed. So it was definitely interesting to go through those documents and kind of see what brought these two entities to the table and both the issues they've discussed and some of the issues they haven't discussed.
Finally, today there was a focus on who is the financial backer of Live Golf, the Saudi government or Saudi financiers, and the issues that raises. You've been covering this for a while. What do the professional golfers think? Some of them jumped to Live Golf. Some of them stayed with the PGA Tour. Does politics come into this for them?
It does and it doesn't. I would say that, they're almost at the stage now where a lot of people almost felt there was some inevitability that Saudi money would be funding parts of the game. They kind of felt it was going this direction. It's just a matter of when. And I think really one of the issues a lot of the golfers have right now is why weren't they included? Why weren't they told? Why were they blindsided? How could this be negotiated without informing not just any golfers, but any members of the PGA Tour's policy board? How could it just be a handful of men, in a room in Venice, kind of hammering out these details? So I think, not to say that no one cares about the politics or the geopolitics behind this deal, but I think a lot of people, their bigger concerns right now are how could this happen without anyone really knowing and having a say? And, it's supposed to be a member-led organization. How come no members from Rory McIlroy to Tiger Woods were really included in these discussions?
Rick Mays, Washington Post sports writer. His stories at WashingtonPost.com and on Twitter at Rick Mays. That's Maese. Thank you very much.
Sure thing.
On Wall Street today, the Dow up 317, NASDAQ up 75, S&P up 29. U.S. senators today receiving a second closed-door briefing about artificial intelligence, focusing on national security with briefers including the Director of National Intelligence, Avril Haines, Deputy Defense Secretary Kathleen Hicks, and others from the intelligence community. Going in, Senator Marco Rubio, Republican from Florida, the Intelligence Committee Vice Chair, spoke with reporters.
Most worried about? Removing the human element from decision making in wartime in terms of, it's a long answer to an important question, but really imagine for a moment if a machine is telling you that these 5 things an adversary is doing means they want to go to war. Imagine a Cuban Missile Crisis where AI made a decision about how to respond instead of the human element. In that case, Bobby Kennedy and others that were advising the president, we might have had a different outcome. So that's concerning. But I also think AI gives smaller nations that historically may not have had the wherewithal to develop certain capabilities that punch above their weight in ways that could threaten world peace in the case of a rogue state like North Korea.
Do you think
but I don't think it's something you can stop. Look, technological advances are impossible to put back in the genie back in the bottle. It's transnational. So even if we passed all the laws in the world in the United States, and we can regulate how our government uses it, you can't put genies like this back in bottles. And so the question is, but it will be, I think one of the things we're not talking about is how disruptive it will be economically. AI will do to higher educated workers in some fields what globalization did to workers in American factories. It's going to put some people out of work. It'll create new jobs, but it's going to eliminate some jobs, and it's going to have a real societal impact that I don't think anyone's spending nearly enough time talking about how disruptive that will be.
So what is Congress's role here when it comes to regulation?
Well, that's the question. First of all, how do you regulate something that is transnational? So we can regulate how the government uses it. We can regulate how the United States, whether we invest in being at the cutting edge of it, but we can't control somebody developing an artificial intelligence capability in another country and how that's deployed globally. That part we can't, we can't control.
Senator Marco Rubio is the vice chair of the Intelligence Committee, Republican from Florida, speaking with reporters heading into the classified briefing for all senators on artificial intelligence. Igor Bobik from HuffPost, their senior politics reporter, tweeting that Senator John Kennedy, Republican from Louisiana, coming out of that briefing, said, quote, that AEI has breathtaking potential to make our lives better if it doesn't kill us first. A story from Roll Call. The House Energy and Commerce Committee on Monday accused the Biden administration of potentially breaking the law by not properly reappointing former White House medical advisor Anthony Fauci and other top officials within the National Institutes of Health. But the Department of Health and Human Services vigorously rejected the accusations, calling them political and inaccurate. The chair of the Energy and Commerce Committee, Congresswoman Kathy McMorris Rogers, Republican from Washington State, led off a news conference today.
Well, good afternoon. We're all members of the Energy and Commerce Committee, and we're here today because HHS Secretary Becerra has failed to follow the Constitution and the law. There's been a complete breakdown of accountability at the agency that has lost the trust of the American people, especially during COVID-19. 14 NIH officials, including Dr. Fauci, held unlawful positions and exercised authority that they didn't have, which included approving $26 billion in grants. This is unprecedented, and it calls into question the validity of every decision that these officials have made since December 2021 to June 2023, including Dr. Fauci's awarding a new grant to EcoHealth Alliance, which is But what is even more egregious has been Health and Human Services cover-up. For more than a year, the administration has misled our committee throughout this investigation, and our question has been a pretty simple one. Can you show us the documents that Secretary Becerra followed the Constitution and the law in reappointing these 14 senior officials who exercised immense power and authority? The question, can you show us the documents? And we're still waiting. There needs to be accountability. No one is above the law. Americans need to know that their tax dollars are being spent responsibly, effectively, and lawfully, and that the people making these decisions are lawfully authorized to make them.
Congresswoman Kathy McMorris Rogers, Republican from Washington State, chair of the Energy and Commerce Committee, with other Republicans on the committee at a news conference today. More from the roll call article explaining this. In December 2016, the medical research law known as the 21st Century Cures Act established 5-year terms for NIH directors, including Dr. Fauci, as director of the National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Diseases. Many of those terms were up in December 2021, but Health and Human Services Secretary Javier Becerra didn't reappoint them until June 2023, Congresswoman Rogers and the other Energy and Commerce Committee leaders alleged. Additionally, the reappointments didn't include Dr. Fauci and former Fogarty International Center Director Roger Glass, who both recently resigned. Dr. Fauci now teaches at Georgetown University. But Health and Human Services says that the appointments were properly done through the NIH director and were only retroactively ratified by Secretary Becerra in June to guard against bad faith legal challenges amid the committee's inquiries. An HHS spokesperson said the department stands by the legitimacy of the appointments, noting that the committee ignored 5 other directors appointed through the same process under former President Trump. That from Roll Call. Thanks for listening to Washington Today. Sign up for C-SPAN's evening newsletter, word for word, to get the stories Washington is talking about sent to your inbox every day. Subscribe at c-span.org/connect. Have a good night.